We are now joined by JC Punongbayan, Assistant Professor at the UP School of Economics. Good morning. Welcome back to Morning Matters.
Thank you very much, Gretchen, for having me.
Okay, JC, this went viral yesterday. I was seeing it all over my feed. Of course, people asking, what does this mean to their time deposits, to their savings? Ano bang ibig sabihin nung 20% uniform tax on interest income?
Yes, so before, the interest or the tax on interest earned from time deposits, for example, there was a graduated rate. So, for example, before, there was no tax on interest on time deposit, for example, lasting more than 5 years, for example. But I think they did a uniform rate already. And this is supposed to simplify the way by which interest earnings can be taxed. However, this is also quite concerning for economies. So even if the law is well-intentioned, there's concern that maybe this could actually discourage people from investing in long-term deposits, time deposits, for example, those lasting more than 5 years. And already the market of the Philippines, the capital market of the Philippines is not so deep, and there's a lot of room to deepen it further to promote investments. But some economists fear that maybe this is going in the opposite direction.
Oh, tinext ko nga yung, yung ano kausap ko sa bangko, tinatanong ko, how does this affect my long-term deposit, 5 years. Sabi niya, ma'am, pareho lang naman, 20% naman na for all. Matagal na. Parang this just makes it standardized. But you're right, this might discourage investing in long-term products, especially also that on the flip side, you could put your money in big risk online gaming or gambling apps, right? I mean, pwede kang tumaya doon at mananalo ka, and that provides a bigger reward as opposed to this. What could have been the goal of the government here in making this uniform?
Well, the overarching context, Gretchen, would be the fact that the government remains in a desperate need for extra revenues. Because when you look at the latest statistics, the budget deficit of the government amounts to about 1.5 trillion pesos every year in recent years. So that means that the government is spending 1.5 trillion pesos more than it is earning by way of tax revenues, for example, non-tax revenues. So the goal is, I think, so this is, I think, one of the low-hanging fruits, in other words. So remember that recently, or last year, the Marcos administration also imposed a tax on digital services. For example, our subscriptions on Netflix, YouTube, Google, etc. So that's one of the also low-hanging fruits that they were aiming at, so that they can shore up the government's revenues. And I think this policy on harmonizing the tax on interest earnings is also in the same vein.
They have framed this move as moving towards fairness and global alignment. Do you agree with that kind of framing? Because one thing that they mentioned was they want investors to come in, reduce investor costs, harmonizing tax policies with global practices.
Well, I think the jury is still out on that, Gretchen. But as I mentioned already, there's not so many Filipinos who are investing in the first place or buying, for example, government securities or other financial instruments. So I think there's a lot of room to promote further people so that they can save more to the extent that they can. But I think especially for people who want to deposit, for example, their long-term earnings, for example, people who are closer to retirement age, who are looking to earn a bit of money from their long-term investments. So I think this is a bigger concern for them. And in fact, I have also seen a number of friends who have been complaining on social media, those who are already retired and are relying on some of their interest earnings for their everyday living. this will definitely affect them a lot.
Pero JC, ang pinakamatatamaan dito yung mga nag-save nag-deposit ng 5 years and longer because yun yung
Correct.
previously tax exempt. But if you are 5 years below, you are still facing the same kind of withholding tax, right?
Exactly. So this is a bigger concern for those who are looking to invest more for the long term rather than the short term. But I think you will notice that in previous tax reform efforts, even starting during the Duterte administration, for example, the personal income tax rate, before there was also a different bracketing for that, and they tried to kind of even out the tax rates across the different income brackets. I think you will notice that these kinds of tax reforms are rather similar in that respect, in that they want as much as possible to harmonize or even out the interest rates across different brackets or different categories of taxable income, for example. So yeah, so that's a common feature of tax reform measures. But again, it goes back to the fact that we need to deepen capital markets and financial markets in the Philippines. They're so very thin compared to those that you find in other ASEAN economies, for example.
What could be a better tax reform structure here to be able to encourage investors to come in and to be able to make it a little bit more progressive? I mean, how do you see that this could have been done better apart from taking advantage of low-hanging fruits?
Well, another way by which the government can raise more money is to simplify the administration of taxes and, for example, remove administrative barriers when it comes to collecting taxes. And to be fair, the Marcos administration, President Marcos also signed the Ease of Paying Taxes Act. I think they were trying to simplify the way that various taxes are administered and collected by the BRR and other agencies. So there have been some other efforts. But of course, when you go to the route of administrative reforms, that's a bit more difficult compared to collecting taxes that people can't really escape from paying. For example, when it comes to the digital services, that's automatically taxed. And before that, consumption tax is the value-added tax, and then the tax on digital services. So one of the principles of a tax system is that the taxes should be as transparent as possible, and from the perspective of the government, it should be easily administered and collected. So I think you will expect that in the future, the government will be imposing first those low-hanging fruits rather than the more difficult ways by which they can improve tax collection.
And then if we see where the taxes are going, it would be easier to collect those taxes, right? But apart from the interest tax or income interest tax, meron din dito no mga binawasan nila katulad ng stock transaction tax, capital gains tax, documentary stamp tax aimed at actually improving movement in the capital market transactions. What opportunities for growth do you see? I mean, with our economy at this point, with the global trade war, tariff war, what opportunities do you see in terms of pushing this forward?
Yes, so those other things that you mentioned, Gretchen, they're actually laudable. So I think the most objectionable part of the new policy would be the tax on interest earnings for long-term deposits. But otherwise, the law seems to be quite sound. But having said that, the overarching context in these days, especially with the lower growth forecasts globally, as well as the uncertainty introduced by Donald Trump with his tariffs, there's a thick cloud of uncertainty that hangs not just on the US, but also the rest of the world, including the Philippines. So I guess this will continue to inform the investment decisions of Filipinos. Many have been frustrated that the stock market, for example, the stock market index has been sideways for a couple of years now. And that boils down to uncertainties about what are the next growth drivers in the Philippine economy. What should we be excited about? Fortunately, we're still trying to identify those potential growth drivers. There could be a lot of those potential growth drivers, including in tourism, for example, manufacturing. But I guess we can improve or boost consumer and investment confidence if there are reforms, including reducing the cost of doing business in the Philippines, the usual things, reducing the cost of power, harmonizing the tax or fixing the tax system. And we have been talking about tax reform measures in recent years, and many, many other things that we should do. We should do our homework so that there could be a better business climate in the Philippines, and there's more incentives for people to invest in financial markets like the stock market, the bond market, etc.
And of course, we remain on the lookout for where we should invest our money long term, especially with the impact of the new CIMEPA Act. But we are also holding our breath here over the tariffs that the U.S. Has announced on the Philippines, about 20% standing currently. It is a plus 3% from the number announced back in April at 17%. What is your read into this? I mean, if you take a look at Southeast Asia, tayo pa rin yung isa sa mga pinakamababa. Kahapon lang or the other day, Indonesia was able to negotiate a 19% tariff rate with the United States. Tayo, we remain at 20%. But of course, our officials are set to meet with the U.S. administration on this. Do you think that we are in a relatively favorable position, I mean, to take advantage of this, or talagang may maapektuhan?
Well, first of all, there's nothing reciprocal about the tariffs that Trump has imposed on us. For example, before all of this, we are also imposing a minimal tax on things that we import from the US, and the average is, I think, about 6% only. But Trump is so-called retaliating with a 20% tariff, which is much larger than the 6% tax that we impose on imports from them. So hindi balance, in other words. And you will see that in other countries as well, like in Brazil. The US actually has a trade surplus with respect to Brazil, but still Trump wants to impose a 50% tariff on imports from Brazil. And he's politicizing this. He says that Brazil should stop investigations when it comes to former President Bolsonaro, who is a friend of Trump. Trump is really politicizing this. This has nothing to do with the actual rate of protectionist policies imposed by other countries on the U.S. But having said that, what is in it for the Philippines? There are pros and cons to this. On the one hand, there could be some benefit in the sense that investors will want to look for or invest and pour their money into other countries other than those which received very high tariffs from Trump. So, for example, investments from in China and Vietnam, maybe some of them will want to look for other places, including the Philippines, where they could put their money. But on the other hand, that goes back to the central question of how attractive are we as an investment destination? Why, in the first place, have Samsung and Apple and other big multinational companies located in Vietnam rather than in the Philippines? We should be soul searching and fixing what's wrong with the Philippine business climate. And I'm worried more, Gretchen, about the implications of this on global growth. Multilateral agencies have already reduced their forecasts for global growth. And inflation is also starting to pick up in the US, and maybe global inflation will also start to pick up. So essentially, Trump is ruining what could otherwise be a good and sound global economic environment because of his economic illiteracy and misreading of what tariffs are in the first place.
Well, it seems he is pushing for a manufacturing renaissance. No? Parang pag tinignan mo yung mga goods that he is imposing high import taxes on, copper is at 50%. Aluminum and steel are also at 50%. He is trying to establish those industries in the United States. I guess the question is it working? I mean, anong basa mo doon? Ano kaya maaaring mangyari? Will the U.S. eventually hit the wall here? Or will they be able to shift the market enough to change things and to be able to curry things in their favor?
Well, I think Trump is hankering for a so-called golden age of U.S. manufacturing, what drove the growth, tremendous growth of the U.S. In past centuries, for example, during the Industrial Revolution. I think Trump wants to revive some of that. However, in the 21st century, the U.S. actually should capitalize on its robust service sector. And when in fact, when it comes to the service sector, the U.S. actually enjoys a tremendous trade surplus. So in other words, it exports, is able to export more than it is importing by way of services. So in the 21st century, trade is no longer, well, of course, there's still a huge role for goods, trade in goods, but trade in services is an increasing share of global growth, and the U.S. actually enjoys a surplus in that. And I think they should capitalize on promoting their exports of services because the world benefits tremendously from it, and also the U.S. earns a lot from it. I don't think, and many economists believe that the tariffs alone will not actually revive the manufacturing jobs that Trump hopes to revive. And until there's a lot more certainty about the tariffs, investors will actually want to put off their invest or hold onto their money and put off their investments until there's greater clarity on where this is going where this is going.
Yes. Until there's a little bit more stability in the market. And I guess it remains to be seen whether the Philippine government can negotiate the 20% down. The U.S. is, of course, the number one partner of the Philippines in terms of export value. So we will be on the lookout for that. Maraming salamat sa iyo for explaining things to us and breaking it down. We have JC Punongbayan, Assistant Professor at the UP School of Economics.
Thank you, Gretchen.